Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something fresher than a medieval peasant's breath. The culinary adventures of the Middle Ages. That's right. Welcome to a time when refrigeration was as mythical as unicorns, and the phrase, food safety, hadn't even been invented yet. So before you settle in for a feast of knowledge, and perhaps a few foodborne nightmares, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, why not leave a comment about the most creative thing you've done with leftovers? It's always fascinating to see what culinary shenanigans people get up to in the modern world. Now, dim the lights, throw on a fan for that comforting hum that soothes your soul, and cozy up. Let's get the wheels turning. Have you ever wondered how people survived on food that could be more lethal than your ex's cooking? How do they keep food from doubling as a personal biohazard? Did they ever care about seasoning, or was it just a game of how rancid can you go? What did medieval parties look like, aside from the inevitable food poisoning? And most importantly, how did you ask a peasant about the freshness of their meat without risking a duel? So let's get ready for a trip back in time, and congratulations! You've just woken up in 1347 with your stomach rumbling louder than the church bells. Hope you brought your iron stomach. You stagger out of bed partly from hunger and partly from the unrelenting smell of whatever cooked last night. Breakfast is on the agenda, and it sounds grand, except it's just a bowl of grim grey porridge. Think oatmeal, but with all the delightful flavours removed. Welcome to your lifelong battle with medieval cuisine. This, dear listener, is where your day begins, right at the bottom of the flavour barrel, armed only with the knowledge that whatever you eat, it's probably been simmering since your grandparents were fresh out of their swaddling clothes. As you shuffle to the communal table, the excitement in the air is palpable. Well, at least as palpable as the scent wafting from the pot that's been left unattended for days, possibly weeks. Fortunate are those who can get a seat close to the hearth, where the heat is a balm against the chill that seeps through the thatched roof, though sadly the smoke only adds to the flavour profile. Today's selection is a charming swirl of soot and despair. You might think you smell bacon too, but let's be honest, bacon is an unattainable myth for you in this realm of dietary drought. Once at the table, you glumly stare into your bowl, which looks less like food and more like a cement mixer disaster. The porridge has the consistency of wallpaper paste, thick enough to defy gravity while somehow still being an insult to your taste buds. But what's a peasant to do? Starve? No, that's not an option. At least not until you've had your shot at this glorious grey slop. You dip your wooden spoon into it and bring it to your lips, half expecting it to come alive and start debating your life choices. As you dig in, you suddenly contemplate the flavours you could be experiencing right now. Cinnamon? Fresh fruit? A sprinkle of sugar perhaps? Alas, today's offering is about as exciting as watching paint dry. The cook from yesterday's pot likely thought, less is more. Reality check. When it comes to porridge, more is more. But it seems he took a vow of blandness. You're left wondering if the original ingredients might have included something resembling flavour, but have since transformed into a mealy mass of unidentifiable mush. With each spoonful, your imagination begins to conjure up wild thoughts of the nobility. They're devouring roasted meats, steaming loaves of bread dripping with butter, and unending goblets of fruity wine while you choke down gritty porridge. After a few bites, you realise you're in another dimension altogether, the culinary world where meat hangs like an elusive dream, and food often shows up at the table with a side of existential crisis. Feeling adventurous, you contemplate adding something to the mix. Maybe a pinch of salt? Oh, wait. Salt is a luxury that comes with its own taxes. Should you barter a goat for a sprinkle? What about the leftover herbs from last night's dinner? Perhaps those underwhelming sprigs can save you from the relentless tedium of this hearty slop. But there's no time for culinary creativity. There are fields to plough and gardens to tend. Once breakfast is finished, a vague approximation of a meal, you're left with a haunting freedom. Yes, a delicious freedom, where nothing remains in your bowl except for the knowledge that you're now prepared to face another day of relentless labour. And labour you shall. After all, it's not like there's an easy way out. Each day is like an endless episode of a medieval reality show where each contestant is forced to wake up to the same uninviting porridge and prove their survival skills in the brutal arena of existence. You push your empty bowl away, and with a deep sigh, wonder if perhaps some rich, well-fed noble in a castle somewhere is secretly plotting your downfall through the simple act of breakfast choices. With a wry smile, you toss your spoon into the pot like a knight casting off his armour. And so, as you chase after what little nourishment this day has left, reflect on the most important lesson learned this morning. A gentle reminder that the medieval breakfast experience is seldom one of joy and grandeur. It's more of a test of grit and a testament to the fortitude required to tackle a grey bowl of uncertainty, because at the end of the day, that porridge is all you've got. So enjoy it, and may tomorrow bring a variety of new and equally perilous breakfast adventures. Let me know if you want to proceed to the next segment. Let's talk about cabbages, the unsung heroes of the medieval meals. You either love this green ball of crunch or you hate that it basically has the culinary excitement of a rock. Spoiler alert, it's in every meal, like an unwanted guest you can't evict. Seriously, if you think you can escape it, think again. Cabbage is the equivalent of that one friend who shows up at every gathering, regardless of the occasion. Birthday party? Cabbage. Wedding reception? Cabbage in the punch. Medieval cuisine is so obsessed with cabbage that if you were to start a hashtag campaign today, it would surely trend, "Wars cabbage forever." Now, imagine waking up in medieval Europe, stomach groaning louder than a confused ox. You drag yourself to the communal kitchen, where the cobwebs might have developed an emotional attachment to the firewood. What's for breakfast? Surprise! It's boiled cabbage. There's something endlessly delightful, yet faintly terrifying about digging into a steaming pile of leaves. And by leaving, I mean disturbing memories from last night's dinner that attempted to escape. Instead of buttery croissants or fluffy omelettes, you're greeted by a bowl of soggy greens that taste like a sad farewell. But don't be fooled. Cabbage isn't just boiled water thanking you for giving it a chance. Oh no, cabbage has levels, like a medieval video game that you never asked to play. There's the humble cabbage, always present in your stew, floating alongside ominous chunks of questionable meat. And then there's sauerkraut, making its dramatic entrance several weeks later. Fermentation, baby. It's like cabbage's rebellious teenage phase where it screamed, "Forget your leafy past, I'm all about probiotics." Your gut may appreciate it, but your taste buds might still be mourning the loss of flavour. Ever try to impress someone with a dinner invite, proudly announcing that you'll be serving cabbage stew? It's a culinary celebration that no one looks forward to. As the guests arrive, they attempt to wear excited smiles, but you know what they're thinking. Didn't I have a dinner once where they served famine meat? Serving cabbage is a bit like sending out invitations that read, "Join me for my next one-man show, featuring the most exciting vegetable in human history." Good luck selling that performance. It may just end up as a medieval tragedy instead. As you sit around the communal table, gratitude for this meal quickly vanishes as everyone digs in. There's an art to cabbage consumption, which involves a graceful blend of chewing, suppressing gags, and reminiscing about the joys of an actual salad. When you finally find a small piece of meat in the pot, it feels like winning the lottery, a moment of pure jubilation that can't last, given your next forkful will almost certainly be calculated as one tooth in cabbage type probability. This might lead to an existential crisis that rivals contemplating the meaning of life itself. Of course, cabbages aren't just food. They're a social instrument used for everything from barter to political manoeuvring. Watch as merchants wave them like flags, wheeling and dealing with fervour as they proclaim, "Cabbage to you, good sir, a deal you can't refuse." Just picture it. A marketplace full of peasants shouting, "I'll trade you 5 cabbages for that piglet." Who knew vegetable diplomacy would be such a hit? Moreover, cabbage, with its fine, leafy exterior, is a misunderstood symbol of nutritional necessity and economic survival. It can fill your belly and dull the ache of a long day's labour, but if you're not careful, it can also block your dreams of tantalising, fully flavoured feasts. Ever tried convincing someone about cabbage's hidden health benefits? You're essentially listing traits that make oatmeal seem exotic. Yes, indeed, packed with vitamins and capable of wilting with grace. And so, as you send your cabbage off to join yesterday's excuse for dinner, you realise that it's not just food, it's a lifestyle. Cabbages, with their odd symmetry, may serve as a reminder. Life isn't always a gourmet affair. Sometimes it's bland, stubborn, and stubbornly present, much like relatives who share too many unsolicited opinions about your choices. So next time you see a cabbage, take a moment to salute it for its sheer consistency in medieval cuisine. Maybe toss it a compliment before throwing it into the pot, because in a world where flavours are dictated by the season and the whims of the Lord, cabbage might just be the one constant holding everything together, both on the plate and in our hearts. Just don't expect it to spice things up unless you can find yourself a medieval magic wand, or at least a good salt shaker. Think fresh meat is a regular occurrence? Enter the medieval hunt, which involves an exhausting trek through mud and underbrush, all while dodging angry critters and your inexplicably bad aim. When you finally snag a rabbit, the real question is, did it even come from the right hunting grounds? Welcome to medieval hunting, a quest so convoluted that the thrill of the chase is often overshadowed by the looming threat of the game warden. If you're a peasant, forget about your hunting dog getting a slow-motion hero scene. You'll be doing all the legwork while avoiding the knight's longbow, aimed as much at your neck as at your dinner. First and foremost, let's clear this up. Hunting isn't just a casual Sunday stroll. It's an Olympic sport with real stakes. You're out there, deep in the great outdoors, trying to catch your dinner like some most disgruntled contestant on a reality show called Survivor Mediocre. Now comes the most pressing question. What exactly are you hunting? In medieval times, the answer is often anything that moves and isn't your neighbour's dog. With the lingering threat of starvation, you set out hoping to snag a hare, or maybe even a plump pheasant. Just watch out for the ever-watchful feudal lord whose land you're technically trespassing. One wrong step, and your prize meat could turn into a reason to lose your head. Of course, the thrill of the chase is one thing. The actual act of catching dinner is another. Picture this. You're crouched in the high grass, hands trembling, as you clutch your wooden spear, resembling more of a frightened schoolboy than a brave hunter. Once that rabbit dashes by, your only experience tells you to throw rather than stab it. So take a moment to carefully aim, then release. Your spear flies, perhaps even hitting your rickety cousin Jeff, who's just standing there admiring the flowers. Oops. But hey, at least you know who to blame for the lack of meat back at home. Aside from the hunting game and the awkward family dynamics, another variable could absolutely destroy your chances of that life-saving rabbit stew: the weather. If the clouds are swirling ominously overhead, you might find yourself battling against rain, mud, and slippery rocks while your prey reclines a safe distance away, likely mocking your current dilemma. Imagine trying to stab dinner while jumping around like a wet duck. desperately hoping not to slip into the nearest quagmire. You came here for meat, not a spa day, but the mud seems to have other plans, and so do the bugs. Let's say you actually manage to catch something. You finally possess a prize. It's wriggling in your hands, alive and possibly more furious than when you started. Now you've got to carry it back home, but how exactly are you going to explain this delightful catch? Oh, this rabbit? I found it roaming. Now your neighbours stare at you like you're deranged because everyone knows you're just a peasant with a few unfortunate life choices. Shouldn't you be raising vegetables instead? They might snipe. Yes, Karen, but your refreshing sarcasm won't provide me with dinner now, will it? When you finally make it home, your next challenge begins the butchering. If you're lucky, you might already have a knife, if it hasn't been lost in the last wild adventure you embarked upon. Forget high culinary arts. This is about survival now, folks. You've got to channel your inner executioner, and like the village DIY spirit, you leap right into your new career as a first-time butcher. Fingers crossed. And let's take a moment to consider how your meal prep strategy resonates with your family, who may or may not also be starving. Everyone gathers around, worried about the incoming dinner. Imagine the glares if you don't slice it properly. The goal here is to deliver the best meat experience possible, which may just mean no one ends up needing the local apothecary for food poisoning. So, there you have it. The unglamorous yet humbling quest for meat in the Middle Ages, a hazardous combination of ambition, bad weather, and family dynamics that often leads to more questions than it answers. What should have been a simple venture can quickly devolve into a comedy of errors with potential for endless consequences. But if you manage to bring home the bacon, a rabbit, you might just find yourself celebrated as the hero of the day. Now that's something to chew on. With no refrigeration, food preservation is an art form filled with trial, error, and more than a hint of spoilage. It's like a game of Russian roulette, but with a side of salt. Are you ready to dive into tactics that might help, if you live long enough? In the medieval world, food preservation methods range from the ingenious to the downright desperate, with each technique offering a unique flavour of risk. You might think curing meats in salt is the safest bet, but the real question is, how long can that slab of pork sit before it demands an exorcist? Let's start with salting, which can easily become a lesson in trust issues. You layer salt around your choice cut like it's too precious to touch, because it is. Keep in mind, you're not just trying to keep it edible, you're also trying to avoid a foodborne episode that could send you straight to the afterlife. After all, who wants to go down in history as the guy who treated his family to botulism for dinner? You slather it on, convinced you've nailed it, only to realise a week later you've brought in a colleague from the local rat population, thinking their presence added character. Spoiler alert, it does not. Next, we explore drying, which in theory seems like a great way to turn fruits and herbs into concentrated flavour bombs. You've heard of sun-dried tomatoes? Well, think more along the lines of shriveled old plums that might as well be chewing gum left under a bench. That pristine vegetable garden you toiled over only to put it through the dehydrating gauntlet. It's now a pile of near fossils. You hang your future dinner from rafters, praying the smoky, dusty air doesn't taint them with mystery flavours best left unexplored. Speaking of smoke, smoking is the art of flavouring your meal while simultaneously imparting an aroma reminiscent of a campfire that won't quit. Picture a delightful hunk of fish sizzling, only to be marinated in a smog-filled dream you never quite agreed to join. The smoke acts as a preservative, but mostly you've just confused your neighbours into believing they're having a barbecue party next door when it's just you, and you are hiding behind layers of delicious thick smoked salmon. Fermentation. Ah yes, the ancient art of turning food spoiled into food revered. What could go wrong with cabbage left out on the counter to turn into sauerkraut? Frankly, it could be a culinary marvel, or something that angst-riddled poets might write about in ages to come. You'll start with lofty expectations, only to end with something that could cause mild hallucinations if consumed in excess. Yet that was a gamble everyone was willing to take. You're not just hoping for a taste sensation, you're actually risking potential gastrointestinal tribulations that could rival the plagues of yore. Not to forget the whole business of pickling, where everything from cucumbers to herring finds its happy home submerged within vinegar and dreams of longevity. But hold on, because this isn't just a simple dive into preservation. This is a strategic move to turn your kitchen into a quirky buffet of things you may or may not want to challenge at dinner. You open a jar and, like a magician's reveal, a wallop of odour escapes, leaving the air thick with an almost shameful tang. Is it food? Is it art? Is it some long-forgotten experiment left by the last occupant? You hold your breath and hope for the best. Now let's talk storage, the medieval Tetris of keeping food safe from spoilage. Your home is not only a living space, but also a fortress, with jars lining shelves as though they're the last line of defence against the encroaching tides of rot. But watch out! Forget the mice! They've been given a master's degree in cheese heists that'd leave you questioning how creative the creature has become. Each corner of your home has become a risk zone, where food is literally a battleground. Can you imagine trudging through your own house, sidestepping suspicious puddles of liquid that have oozed from jars that could hold secrets or nightmares? By this point, you might wonder if it's all worth it. Living on the edge, or rather the edge of exploration, is the essence of medieval preservation. You've navigated a culinary minefield with the deftness of a soldier, dodging arrows in a war where every meal is a gamble. Good luck trying to outwit a jar of something that was a vegetable last week and might be a haunting spectre of your dinner plans this week. So, with these insights into the smorgasbord of sadness that is food preservation, remember that in the Middle Ages, survival often depended less on the culinary arts and more on sheer audacity to consume whatever your hands pulled successfully from that mystery jar. You're not just preserving food, you're forging a legacy, and possibly a chicken casserole of regret. Bon appétit. Step into the kitchen, where everything is prepared over an open flame, if you're lucky. Your first challenge: figuring out how to use that giant cauldron without burning everything to a crisp, including your sense of hope. The kitchen is a chaotic blend of smoke and screams, where the very concept of culinary precision is as foreign as indoor plumbing. Think of it as a reality show challenge, where the only prize is survival and possibly a very bad case of dysentery. The nightly cooking ritual typically begins with gathering wood, if you can find any, that is. And by gathering, I mean playing a game of which branch won't spark a small forest fire. Imagine laying your hands on a perfect piece of kindling, only to be thwarted by neighbourhood livestock who seem to believe your efforts are just an elaborate game of human baiting. The cows, goats and chickens provide more comedic relief than actual support, as you wrestle to build a fire that won't immediately snuff out if the wind so much as thinks about blowing. Once your fire is roaring like an angry dragon who lost its lunch, you will face your next great medieval struggle: food preparation. If you thought peeling an onion was hell today, wait until you slice through root veggies and mouldy remnants of last week's stew. Picture yourself as an archaeologist uncovering the layers of what was once edible. You'd better pray to the ancient gods that your knife is sharper than your neighbour's wit, which is usually as dull as the utensils they own. And let's not forget about the drudgery of the pot itself, a large cauldron designed to hold everything from pottage to whatever animal you may have murdered recently. You might glance wistfully at the noble's shiny, well-maintained pots, not realising they're also the reason behind their dubious digestion. Your trusty cauldron, on the other hand, has gathered a certain essence over the years, a unique blend of all previous dishes expertly mixed with a hint of resentment. If only it could talk, you'd hear a monologue riddled with complaints and trauma. Simmering your concoction involves mastering both timing and a form of medieval dance as you sidestep the occasional spat of hot grease, which is not just a warning, it's a rite of passage. You shake your head while reminiscing about fresh ingredients that might have existed in a better world, one where you incinerate vegetables instead of feigning culinary prowess on whatever scavenged scraps were available. As you stir the pot, you can't help but feel like you're casting a spell, albeit a dark one. The more you add, the more like a mad scientist you become. Is that dish called metaphorical death stew? Watch in horror as it bubbles over, congealing into a thick sludge that would make a toad's back appear glamorous. There's an art form to this. If you've ever wondered how courage and stupidity can coexist, just recall the time you bravely thought to add just a pinch of whatever that was to your stew. Cooking in the medieval era was also a communal affair. You'll likely find a gaggle of scrappy children vying for your attention and food alike, putting the proverbial "will work for food" adage to shame. Can I have some? Is there more? Why does this taste like despair? As you ladle out portions, you might ponder how you can fragment your meagre offerings into family-sized portions while still appearing generous. But fear not. Sending the kids off to fetch a special ingredient usually ensures peace and a quiet kitchen, at least until they remember you owe them, yet again, for last week's backyard bonfire adventure involving questionable herbs. When all is said and done, your meal is served, if you can still refer to it as food. You gaze down at the bubbling aromatic mess you've concocted, half proud and half terrorized. "Here's dinner," you proudly declare, the laughter faded, and everyone dumps some of your culinary disaster into their bowls with feigned enthusiasm that rivals any medieval court performance. As the family gathers around the hefty table, covered in rudimentary utensils, you come to realize the real purpose of cooking in this backward time. It's not necessarily about the food itself. It's the camaraderie built around the bitter flavors and uncertain scents. Everyone raises a goblet, filled with whatever passable liquid you could brew, and suddenly the culinary nightmare transforms. Families bond over survival. Laughter erupts at the aroma of your latest dish, and maybe, just maybe, the mysteries of medieval cooking still sow seeds of joy in the most unlikely places. So next time you complain about your dinner choices, remember, you're not grappling with a heckling farm of animals while trying to dodging scalding pot of dubious origins. You've got it easy. Imagine a feast fit for a king. Now imagine working tirelessly just to catch a whiff of it while standing in the corner like a hungry wallflower. Forget about chairs. You'll be lucky to get a crumb or two when the Lord throws you a pity scrap. Welcome to the medieval banquet, where the nobles gather in swanky halls adorned with banners, chandeliers made of animal horns, and tables so long they could double as medieval airport runways. As for you, the ever-diligent peasant, you're shuffling around like a footnote in their grandeur, desperately eyeing the feast while silently praying that the Lord's dog is less picky than the nobility. As the sun sets, the cook's anointing whisks conjure fragrant clouds of roasting meats, freshly baked bread, and a suspiciously gamey hint of whatever critter the hunting party managed to catch that day. The nobleman at the head of the table, clad in fine furs and a goblet that appears to be made of gold, spoiler alert, it's probably just a cheap imitation, is getting ready to grace his subjects with a grand speech about how hard life is, so please do not forget to tip your server, or perhaps just throw a few coins at the nearest peasant. Meanwhile, your stomach is doing its best impression of a wailing banshee, begging for attention. The main event begins with the ritual of hands. No, not the kind where you shake off the awkwardness of approximately 30 years of social isolation. Instead, nobles dive right into dishes, fingers clawing through platters of roast peacock stuffed with spices so costly they'd make a wealthy merchant green with envy. But let's be honest, the real delicacy is the leftover bones plucked from the feasters' plates like candy. You might find yourself diving headfirst into the artery-clogging remnants once the lords have had their fill and vacated the premises, all while hoping no one catches you pilfering from their trash heap of excess. As the evening wears on, rather than the sound of sitting round cosy fires sharing tales of valour, you'll find that medieval banquets resemble more of an ancient wrestling match. Nobles bristle with ambition and ego, outdoing each other in theatrical displays of gluttony, while tripping over extravagant parodies of hospitality and grace. When not throwing elbows in the midst of hogs' legs and platters of pottage that dare to bear your name, you might find a missing foot from someone's previous meal hidden beneath the table, a less than pleasant reminder of the life you're trying to escape. Somewhere, the Lord's favoured minstrel strums a lute, singing ballads of chivalrous knights and fair maidens. You'd probably find this all peaceful enough if it weren't for the man in a resplendent tunic who starts bellowing half-songs after the second goblet of claret, because nothing says refinement like slurred insults about the peasants and their unclean miseries being sung loudly for all to hear. No wonder no one is joining in. At this point, even the local rodents have opted to clear the room. They know better than to tangle with the chaos of medieval dining. Finally, as the last flames die down, you realise that waiting for a morsel to fall unceremoniously from the mouth of a noble is a game of luck and patience, a roulette wheel at a banquet. Spoiler, your odds of catching a scrap of meat rival that of winning an argument with a lord who's had too much wine. But despair not, dear listener. As the gathering dissolves into laughter and drunken revelry, a few cunning souls will manage to slip into the shadows, pilfering whatever crumbs remain until the servants muster the courage to chase you down. So there you are, still standing in the corner, processing the chaotic whirlwind of smells, sounds, and sights of the worst dinner party you've ever experienced. Yes, it's a feat to behold, but what's a peasant to do? Starvation lurks just outside the banquet hall, a far crueler enemy than whatever posh faux pas happens at the dinner table. So you return home, your belly empty yet again, dreaming of the joys of bread, or perhaps just some overcooked turnips from yesterday. As for the noble's merriment, consider it a strange blend of elegance and excess. 'Cause at the end of the day, you're here for survival, not a front-row seat to a theatrical display of medieval gluttony. Welcome to the feasting tradition that is merely a stepping stone to your sweet escape from the kingdom of meagre portions. And if they ask, don't forget to tell a tale or two about the glorious nobility of your hunger, because frankly, that's the only thing they'll remember of you. You thought that leftover stew from last week would still be okay? Think again. In the medieval era, leftover food is a game of chance. It'll either provide nutrition or turn you into the next resident of the graveyard. Soup or stew? More like goo of doom. Imagine you're a medieval peasant, living life like a true culinary daredevil, with no way to check if what's simmering in the pot was made 3 days or 3 weeks ago. If you're lucky, your leftovers will be slightly off, with maybe just a hint of a smell that makes your stomach turn. But if fate doesn't favour you, or someone mistakenly doubled down on fermenting the cabbage, well, let's just say it could be the beginning of a very short and tragic tale. The first rule of leftovers in the Middle Ages: if it smells bad, eat it anyway. Here the motto was simpler than a peasant's outfit: waste not, want not. Those days of coddling your taste buds with divine culinary creations are behind you. Now your focus shifts to surviving the day without calling on the Grim Reaper to show himself for an early check-in. Sure, your grandmother swore by that ancient "don't waste food" mantra, but did she ever suspect she was risking an intimate dance with dysentery? Forget about food critics and Michelin stars. You're simply trying to determine which meal might not send you into a funeral pyre. Picture this. You sit down for your evening meal, surveying the pot filled with an unidentifiable blend of questionable meats and vegetables. But when you look deeper, right past the floating chunks of something resembling a potato, the ultimate horror reveals itself. The dreaded greenish fuzz. That's right. Your stew has transformed into a mycological horror film, and like any good horror movie, the suspense only heightens when you pause to consider your choices. Is this a chance for a midnight snack or just a one-way ticket to what was I thinking land? And therein lies the conundrum, dear listener. You can slop some bread into that unholy amalgamation and pretend it's a gourmet experience, or you can resolutely shove it aside and try to ignore the low rumblings of your sickening stomach as it grumbles in protest. Don't like the options? Tough luck. Historical truth says dinner is what it is, and besides, what's life without a little risk? You're not attending a banquet for royals. You're just trying to scrape through with your dignity intact, which, let's be honest, may have already taken flight when you last checked for clean linen. Now let's address preservation methods, or rather the catastrophic lack thereof. You'd think with no fridges, freezing would rely on universal laws of physics, right? Wrong. Instead, medieval folk embraced the art of smoking, drying, salting, and pickling out of sheer desperation. Yes, brinning was a noble effort, but it still doesn't erase the memory of experimenting with fresh leftovers that were merely the last thing in the pot. You may as well be rolling the dice on a recipe straight from the depths of hell, and heaven forbid you actually have a good meal to look forward to. The centerpiece of most medieval feasts is that glorious roast laying on the table, followed by the silence as everyone watches it decompose over the next few days. Enjoy your indecision as you contemplate dinner while, very possibly, your meal starts to develop a personality of its own, which is not nearly as charming when you realise it's trying to outtalk you, as you dip the latest hunk of irretrievably spoiled food into your bowl one last time. Just remember, you could have been that peasant who had the eloquence of a rat trying to steal a crust of bread but still getting into trouble for eating your neighbour's last turnip. In this world, improvisation is key, and every meal can very well lead to triumph or tragedy. So next time you think about leftovers, raise a glass to those medieval peasants who lived to risk it all again. They somehow turned dinner into a game of culinary roulette, and somehow, just somehow, they managed to survive, for another day at least. So when you finish that somewhat suspicious bowl of stew, just remember, your ancestors survived worse. Life in medieval times might have been incredibly putrid, but somehow they ploughed through. Cheers to the noble art of swallowing one more bite for the sake of survival. Want to spice things up? Welcome to the wild world of herbs, where you can either enhance your meal or accidentally poison the entire household. Forget fine dining. This is a gamble with your digestive system. In medieval kitchens, every sprinkle of seasoning carried with it the potential for flavour, alongside a side of dread. Picture yourself in a cramped, smoky kitchen with a window that might as well be a decorative hole in the wall, catching every unsought odour from the livestock outside. You're surrounded by burlap bags filled with herbs that could either elevate your questionable stew or send you to an early grave. Now, you might be thinking, isn't seasoning just a sprinkle of this or a dash of that? Well, before you pat yourself on the back for your modern culinary prowess, let's dive into the bubbling cauldron of medieval herb lore. First off, there are the essentials: parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. While you might imagine simulating an idyllic herb garden, in reality, these herbs were often your only leverage against the blandness of pottage, a thick swill of whatever happened to be lying around. That's right, You wouldn't just risk your life for spices, you'd also be striving for your right to enjoy the very meal that could land you in the hospital, or worse, the grave. Now, about that kitchen, if you could even call it that. You might have a wooden table, a small hearth, and the ever-present smell of animal dung wafting in from the generously shared living quarters. The herbs, however, represent your desperate attempt to bring a whiff of civilization into your life. Perhaps you rummaged through some local hedgerows earlier that day, scrounging herbs like it's the medieval version of a grocery run. With each clump of wild thyme plucked from the earth, you're potentially stirring your eternal hopes for flavour and sending your palate into a euphoric ballet. But here's the kicker. Not all herbs are friendly. While you might be tempted to follow the trail of a medieval herbalist handbook, the truth is they're about as trustworthy as your next-door neighbour who's secretly feeding from your garden. The fine line between culinary delight and toxic disaster often got blurrier than a drunken peasant's vision. For every soothing chamomile flower, there's a hemlock lurking in the shadows, ready to ruin dinner plans, friendship, and perhaps even your eternal soul. Have you ever tasted something with the subtlety of a well-mixed potion, or should we say poison? How about serving your guests something that could potentially double as a lethal headache? Now let's talk about remedies. You might find yourself sniffing at your latest batch of pottage and thinking, a sprinkle of this fancy herb ought to do the trick. Herbs weren't just there to season, they were lifesavers. Infusions of rosemary could ease digestive distress. Great for the occasional post-meal regret. Plus, if you were particularly clever, maybe you'd choose mint to combat that awful morning breath. Not exactly the enticing treat you'd hope your neighbour would find appealing. Forget toothpaste. It's all about rendering yourself more pleasant with a dash of mint and a thin backstory of, I just walked through the herb garden. Of course, let's not ignore the caste system of herbs, as if it weren't complicated enough. Nobles sprayed their dishes with imported spices worth their weight in gold, while you and your peasant friends stuck with whatever grew nearby, or what could have been scavenged from the spoils of an old battlefield. Just imagine, your lord dining on rare saffron risotto while you choke down your last turnip. But as long as you can sprinkle a little parsley on top and convince your guests it's artfully rustic, you might just make it through the meal without too much self-loathing. Stir in a little social aspect, and you've got folks gathering around the hearth at mealtimes, swapping tales about the latest herb discoveries. Did you hear about Agnes? Tried her hand at sage and got herself an amazing stew. Wait, is she still alive? You might whisper to your best friend while peeking into the pot. And let's face it, if you're going to die from culinary adventures, you better leave a story behind that fuels someone's dinner conversation for generations. Whatever the case, herb usage is a delicate dance of chance, flavour exploration, and a generous sprinkle of adventure, or misadventure, making every meal an excursion into the unknown. So next time you're adding seasonings to your carefully curated feast, raise a glass of the finest ale, that won't kill you, to your medieval ancestors who dared to tread the thrilling line between enjoyable dinner and delightful demise. Cheers. The mystery of dairy, curds and curiosities. Let's explore dairy, shall we? Milk that's just a tad over the hill joins the fray, because why wouldn't you want a side of sourness with that cheese? The locals may call it delightful, but you secretly wonder if it's just a ruse. Picture it. Your morning begins with a swift trot to the livestock pen. And by swift, I mean it may take an hour, considering how much more coaxing your day-old calf requires than a toddler in a tantrum. Maybe it's because it knows what's coming. The dairy of the Middle Ages is like a game of chance. Your first step? Straining to extract milk from that unfortunately stubborn creature, usually while wearing your best expression of forced patience. And let's not even start with the smell. I mean, if it doesn't assault your nostrils first, then congrats. You may have stumbled upon a modern-day miracle, but if it does, just know that it's part of a balanced medieval breakfast, alongside bread that could double as a doorstop. All right, moving on, now comes the less-than-zen task of turning that fresh milk into cheese. Making cheese in the medieval era is not what the cooking channel would have you believe. It's loud, it's messy, and frankly, it's an endurance test. You start boiling milk in a pot that might also be harbouring the ghost of last week's whey. If you're lucky, something miraculous happens. Curds. They form like little white clouds floating in a rural sky of dairy drama. But let's be clear, these clouds are less like cotton candy and more like the result of 3 bad days under the sun. Still, you've got your basic cheese now, and it even has a charming name: curds and whey. How's that for poetic? But hold on, this cheese-making adventure isn't over yet. Time to drain the whey. Think of it as cheese's way of telling you it's going on a cleanse. You strain it through a cloth, which is probably also questionable in cleanliness. What's that? You're short on cheesecloth? No problem. That perfectly used tunic should do the trick, as if it was used for anything less than literal grimness. And if you think it ends there, oh, you poor misinformed soul. If you want a little flavour with your cheese, prepare for a scavenger hunt worthy of the latest blockbuster. Spices, herbs, a dash of salt. These are the true treasures of the medieval world. In this culinary quest, you'll be searching through complex spice routes or begging your local noble to toss you a pinch for helping hem his tunic. Spoiler: getting those spices to flavour your cheese could end up costing you a fortune, like selling a kidney except less beneficial for your long-term health. And of course, let's not forget about the milk that you don't drink, because it's been soured into a prodigious frenzy of unintentional dairy experiments. Welcome to the wonder of fermented dairy. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to sip on something resembling sour cream mixed with disappointment, you're in for a treat. But hey, people used it for everything from savoury porridge to raucous community meals. Just pray you aren't invited to someone's home when the unfortunate sour concoction makes its grand debut. While the thought of rich, soft cheese may prickle your palate, you must remember, medieval cheese is whatever you make of it. Is it recognisable in its essence? Sure. Does it share a resemblance to today's creamy delicacies? Questionable at best. Or think about ricotta. If we lived in this charmingly chaotic era, it might just mean teenage boys' sloppy breakfast. Now that's a culinary title to carry with pride. In closing, dairy in medieval life is an adventure wrapped in insanity. Between sour milk, erratic cheese production, and the arduous quest for decent flavour, one might wonder if it's really worth the hassle. Yet through it all, people still consumed dairy, shared pits of laughter over rich curds and creamy concoctions, and somehow unravelled its mysteries through culinary triumphs and tribulations. So next time you take a bite out of that rich cheddar aged to perfection, just take a moment to think about the medieval dairy farmer. They fought through rough mornings, questionable aromas, and the world-changing experience of transforming milk into an edible product, all in the name of tradition, survival, and maybe a little taste of adventure. After all, in an era where Lady Luck could drop you off at either an epic meal or food-borne disaster, dairy was just one hell of a historical gamble. We've got a feast to prepare, except you're not on the guest list. As a peasant, you're stuck slaving away long hours for your lord's enjoyment while making meals so fanciful they should have their own religion. Good luck with the leftovers. Imagine rising before dawn while the moon is still making a sleepy descent. You stumble into the kitchen with the same enthusiasm as your average snail, utterly defeated. The king-sized cauldron is already filled with whatever mystery ingredients your lord decided would impress the neighbours this week. Perhaps a boiled crow, or if you're lucky, a handful of rather sad potatoes. You're hoping for a raw thrill of excitement, but alas, the only thrill you get is from dodging the scratching claws of that crow as it attempts to liberate itself from its current fate. The fire crackles ominously, sending you into an existential spiral, while you remember that this isn't exactly haute cuisine. It's more like playing catch with a chicken in the dark while trying to mix ingredient failure with a vague approximation of a meal. Picture this. You're mixed into a big, bustling kitchen adorned with endless smoke, steaming pots, and the kind of aromas that would likely scare off your enemies. The nobles expect only the finest dishes to grace their long wooden tables, piled high with everything from roasted swan to the still-twitching fish you were forced to catch yourself. You're here perfecting what kitchen etiquette Shrush bells and your neighbours never teach, balancing dignity while prepping food that's probably been on the verge of deciding to walk off the table. When it's finally time for the grand feast, you jostle your way through a throng of polished metals and food-laden platters that resemble medieval version of extravagance. Watch closely how the lords and ladies hold their goblets aloft, toasting to health and prosperity that absolutely don't include you. A peasant's meal on feast days might consist of something like meat that's not meat, or vegetables carefully snatched from someone else's rightful plot. Ah, the life. Meanwhile, the Lord's table is draped in holistic displays of food that could make modern social media influencers weep with envy. How do they balance these feasts so artfully, while you're merely praying that you can eat something vaguely resembling nourishment in the post-feast cleanup? As you serve, you can feel the weight of expectation in those judgmental, prying eyes. You only get one chance to impress, lest you end up as the laughing stock, reminding everyone that last year's pig roast literally went belly up later that night. Once the meal is over, and the nobles roll away from the table like blueberries in search of a warm place to hibernate, it's your turn to clean up. What do they say? No good meal goes unpunished. Scraps of food that could withstand the test of time are strewn across the remnants of grand capers. Those bones lying helpless in the corners remind you of the bones you'll probably get to gnaw on come breakfast. Just when you think it's all over, and your lord asks you to whip something up for the next meal, you flash a weak smile as if preparing a gross concoction can save you from getting the uncouth peasant label slapped on your back. You'll likely have to dig through the expired provisions that the local lord deemed fit enough for you to prepare once again. Bonus points if you can hide the fact that even a drop of this food might land you a one-way ticket to the privy for a week. Even the simplicity of cleaning is a farce. You maneuver around leftover table scraps like a game of dodgy hopscotch, while a ravenous herd of rats scuttles by, competing for their own theatrical leftovers. Speaking of leftovers, guess who's getting that weird stew of dubious origin now, thanks to your well-meaning heart? You serve a little to yourself, hoping for artistic inspiration or divine intervention to make it something other than a small swoop of flavours that clash harder than your family during church services. Ah, the circle of medieval dining life. You may ask yourself where your dignity went. Was it left behind with the crow? In this culinary underworld, there's always a sense of humour, even amid overflowing pots and questionable meat. Next time you're munching on something gourmet, take a moment to appreciate that someone, somewhere, potentially gazed deeper into the cauldron of culinary chaos that is a medieval kitchen. In the end, as you stumble home after what feels like centuries, remember this. No matter how frazzled you feel from the struggles of the noble feast, it's all part of the medieval dance that keeps people laughing amidst the smell of vaguely edible food. And who knows, maybe someday you'll even get to enjoy a banquet like the nobles, even if it's bartered for with your precious creative sanity. Sharing food sounds lovely until you realise you're all gathered around a single pot like vultures at a buffet. You'll have to sacrifice personal space and your dignity for a taste of the communal pottage. Bon appétit, The scene unfolds in the modest kitchen of a medieval hovel, most likely dim, cramped, and filled with an aroma that might best be described as a blend of yesterday's turnip stew and a hint of something unidentifiable. The pot bubbles away over a sputtering wood flame, casting flickering shadows that dance merrily across the faces of impatient peasants. You wonder if they're happy or just indifferent to the profound stench of sweat, animals, and something so old it might have reincarnated as a vegetable. What's on the menu tonight? Why, it's a hearty pottage, an honorary title for whatever can be harvested, scavenged, or bartered for that week. There's no recipe, just an open invitation to toss in leftovers, roots, and maybe an errant potato that rolled under the table last month. There's a fine art to this. Mixing mush is nearly a communal ritual. You've got enthusiastic cooks who are equal parts resourceful and hopeless, throwing in yesterday's scraps like they're performing a desperate form of culinary improv. Ever wondered why pottage might resemble a very confused swamp? Now you know. Now, before the moment of service arrives, you'll want to gear up for the delightful experience of potluck. That's right. Each family races ahead to fill their bowl, each desperately clutching their wooden ladle as though it were a prized sword. It's gladiatorial. The pot itself becomes a battleground, where elbows fly, diets are forgotten, and a grumpy grandmother stands guard at the rear to keep 3 squabbling children in line. You can almost hear the collective thoughts. This could be my last meal, as the first person in line risks life and limb to secure a milk jug of, let's be real, water that has met goldfish more recently than humans. As the contents of the pot slosh around in a soupy tango, eager hands reach in, eager for a taste of fibre and grit. Usually it's whoever lacks the sense of personal space that winds up with the biggest portions, while the shy ones are left with a few soggy bits of cabbage and a stray carrot that was more rotten than harvest ready. You might think, why not just wait for the next batch? Ah, yes, the ever-present reality of food scarcity. Tomorrow's potluck could very well consist of 2 bruised apples and 5 wishful dreams. Midway through this culinary combat, an argument breaks out. Surprise! Was the carrot meant to be in there at all? And what's this? The last remaining chunk of meat might have seasoned the entire feast, potentially worth a king's ransom, and certainly a few fights over who spotted it first. Of course, while this transpires, a cow rummages behind you, casually eating the grass as if it isn't part of the larger problem. Hush, dear bovine, this is not your pottage. As all this plays out, you'll gain a new appreciation for community cooking. Everyone shares a few kinship bonds, and not just the bloodlines, congregating in a haze of warmth, smells, and the realization that this one meal finds you all as equals, united in your quest to simply survive, together. The clinking of wooden bowls, the laughter sprinkled amid the occasional grimace, and the occasional squabble all bring to light a remarkable truth. In medieval times, communal feasting is less about the meal and much more about the culture of endurance against the backdrop of uncertainty. Once everyone finally has their lumpy servings, savour every slurp as each morsel feels like a victory over the unending cycle of misery, or at least a smart delegation of who gets to be on potato duty next week. The unremarkable beauty of it falls into place. Shared sustenance not only fills you up but bonds you in collective gratitude and resignation that tomorrow you will embark on yet another culinary adventure, or disaster, depending on what hits the cooking pot next. If you thought dinner parties were awkward now, just imagine hosting one in the Middle Ages. Forget hors d'oeuvres and wine pairings. You're serving up a petrified loaf of bread and some questionable sauce that might, or might not, have been rat stew. But don't worry. All of this absurdity is bound together by camaraderie, and while sometime the group might feel like a pack of hungry wolves, there's also an undeniable closeness that forms. So as you settle into the communal warmth and slurp your pottage with a spoon, fashioned from what might once have been an ox's horn, know this: you're not just consuming food, you're swallowing a piece of history, curiosity, and the absurdity of human resilience. Here's to hoping tomorrow's fare is less swampy and maybe just a tad less communal. Thirsty? Your choices are endless. A vile mixture of weak ale or gasp, water that appealed to your sense of adventure, and your death wish. The medieval drink menu is less about flavour and more about surviving until breakfast. When you wake up in a world where fresh drinking water is as scarce as kindness in a poker game, you quickly learn to appreciate the subtleties of what's available. As unsettling as your options are, you always have to weigh the satisfaction of quenching your thirst against the very real threat of dysentery. Imagine, if you will, a wooden tankard filled with ale that has all the qualities of a watered-down disappointment. This is your morning brew, friends. Why ale, you ask? Because every other option is worse. Water in medieval Europe often comes directly from stagnant rivers, where farm animals enjoy their daily dips, making it the medieval equivalent of playing Russian roulette. Will it be refreshing, or will it give me the runs? Becomes a gamble you partake in daily. Weak ale, often brewed with a tiny percentage of alcohol, becomes a peasant's best friend. It's like using a juice box for sustenance when you're really just trying to fill the gaping void of hunger. You can drink it for breakfast with barely a second thought, as children partake in this delightful brew too. Yes, that's right. The very same children who would be delightfully nibbling on their breakfast pottage will also be holding their own tankard, lifting their spirits with a potion designed to strengthen the body while desperately fighting off the grimy realities of medieval hydration. It's not so much a breakfast drink as it is a childhood rite of passage. Surviving a stomach bug or two just adds character. Speaking of hydration, have you ever pondered the very concept of medieval water? Imagine water from a well, a thin, murky texture that glistens like it's just concealing a family of water bugs. Or worse, if you had the audacity to dip your cup into this abyss, you'd pray fervently to the spirits of saintly ancestors for guaranteed survival. On top of that, our flavourless liquid friend has been known to float around like it's either iced tea or a death trap. The villagers encourage you to stick to the ale, but deep down you wonder if that's just a ruse to maintain the morale of an already beleaguered populace. Fancy a slightly spicier option? Consider Hippocras, a drink made of wine mixed with honey and spices, essentially an ancient concoction, hoping to impress your taste buds while still being utterly unpredictable for your stomach. Naturally, it's sweet enough to convince you that you're indulging in luxury, though your body might not agree later. A simple question always echoes: who knew dinner could become a double act of taste and terror? Then there's the carousing aspect of drinking. Boozy gatherings are a tangled web of belches and camaraderie, or perhaps a touch of danger. Ever found yourself at a festival where mead flows freely? It's not uncommon for the merriment to lead to some questionable decisions, including how many pints you can manage before declaring a hogshead of ale to be your best friend. But watch out. After a few too many, best friend might just be the term used for your next regrettable choice in partners. Now, if you're lucky enough to snag a spot at a lord's table, congratulations. You get a taste of the exclusive party drinks, like strong wines diluted with water, or if you're really daring, spiced and mulled for more revelry. But that doesn't guarantee you won't be silently judging the texture of the noble's fine vintage, which could be equivalent to your nightmarish water. And then there's the matter of the tavern scene, your typical medieval bar where gossip and grumbling collide like tossed sheep guts on a grimy floor. The barman behind the counter lends an ear to whoever stirs his drink specials, all while encouraging patrons to ponder their drink's poise, while they dismiss the validity of any philosophy in life. To disease becomes the rallying cry, erasing any sense of security as you hoist your cup in agreement. So, embrace your drink, be it weak ale or questionable water, because in the Middle Ages it's the toast that keeps you and the entire kingdom from drowning in despair. Even if every sip comes with a side of intestinal mortal risk, there's camaraderie in shared survival and a bond formed over a mutual acceptance of life's foul beverages. So, here's to you, brave soul, lifting a tankard to the absurd reality of your medieval choices. Every gulp could lead you to another day, until tomorrow's thirsty leap into the precarious yet fascinating abyss of being alive today. Forget ciabatta. Medieval bread is forged from anything that resembles flour, and trust me, your butt may as well be making the bread. See how quickly you can lose your fillings and your appetite all at once. In a world where the quality of your loaf could make or break your day, bread is king, or at least a very questionable jester in the royal court of cuisine. Welcome to the bread-making bonanza of the medieval ages, where the concept of gluten was more who than what, and the only flour you could count on was the one doused in dirt from the floor, or possibly enriched with the occasional rat droppings. The bread-making process begins early in the morning, long before the rooster's crow could wake you up with unrelenting annoyance. You shuffle out of bed, your joints creaking as if you just completed a mini-marathon. The day starts with gathering whatever grains you can find: wheat, rye, and if you're lucky, a dash of barley. Just remember to leave out any mystery ingredients from the bottom of the barrel, aka last season's expired grain, which might result in future events involving public embarrassment and grave illnesses. You might even catch yourself praying for some actual flour, instead of what looks like a swathe of thatch ripped from an old roof. Once you've collected your dubious goods, it's time to grind them into flour. Don't expect a modern grinder to rescue you. No, you'll be wielding a rough millstone like a medieval gladiator battling the onslaught of your hunger. Picture praying harder than a penitent at church as you twist that stone round and round while lamenting the fact that you could have just become a professional gravedigger instead. The only thing scarier than your aching arms will be the mixture you're about to make. But let's add a dash of optimism and some questionable confidence, shall we? Next, we move to mixing. Spoiler alert, this part includes water that definitely smells less than fresh. You pour it into your flour like you're trying to turn swamp sludge into Michelin star bread. If you're a peasant, good luck finding yeast, a luxury so rare it could be cherished like gold. So, while some lucky nobles await the process of fermenting dough, you'll throw in whatever scraps of sourdough from last week's batch remain. Will it rise? Who knows? It's like playing a game of culinary Russian roulette. What unfolds next is a dough that, dare I say, might remind you of gooey cement. You might find yourself wondering if a little creativity in the kitchen could somehow save the day. Once neatly rolled into shape, assuming you can get it to look like anything other than a lump resembling yesterday's leftovers, you'll throw it on the side of your hearth, praying the fire will be more forgiving than life has been. But wait, opportunity knocks with a twist of medieval norms: the crust. This segment of bread making is where things go downhill faster than your chances of drinking clean water. The noble class above you is likely feasting on crusty artisanal bread. Meanwhile, you're stuck with the hard ball of embarrassment that could double as a medieval doorstop. And when you attempt to chew, it's like wrestling a rabid raccoon at a county fair. It's not pretty. Is that a nutty flavour? Or a characteristic reminiscent of a shoe sole? Truly a solid mix for the menus of death. Now, let's touch on the delightful side of bread in medieval life. The interactions it invokes. If you're dining at the Lord's table, slaving over that banquet while trying not to spill ale on your restless lords, You'll delight in the ritual of breaking bread together. Except you'll be lightly scolded for collecting crumbs like a starving rat. You'd better hope no one offers you stale bread soaked in gravy. You'll soon find your head spinning with every uninvited flavour sensation. Ah, and there's always the disaster of bad bread. If you were particularly unlucky, you'd be subjected to spoiling, leading to the delightfully popular and incredibly tragic bread sickness. And lo, you'd be scrambling to make friends with your barber surgeon, who's always eager to lend a hand with his trusty shears, or at least preach to you about what an unfortunate life choice it is to indulge in expired food. Congratulations, you've survived the art of medieval bread. Just roll with the punches or crusts and gear up for the next culinary adventure. You're one horrid loaf closer to becoming a living legend. And as you succumb to the whims of stale bread, remember, life's a bit like your loaf. If it doesn't rise, it may just flatten you out in a way only history remembers through bad puns and even worse breakfasts. If you thought dining was a formal affair, you're sorely mistaken. Etiquette in the Middle Ages is all about subtlety, or more accurately, lack thereof. Where's your napkin? You'll need one when someone breathes loudly in your face. The rules of the table are less about fine manners and more about the delicate dance of survival in the swarming chaos of communal dining. Picture this: a crowded hall, candlelight flickering against stone walls, the rich aroma of a questionable stew wafting through the air. There's no personal space, no designated seating, and no social distancing. A true recipe for disaster. As you approach the long wooden table, you quickly realise that your fellow diners aren't particularly focused on the culinary arts. They're more concerned with shoveling food into their mouths before it disappears entirely. Forget about utensils. Here, hands are the primary dining tools. And while most modern diners remain appalled at anything resembling finger food, in the Middle Ages fingers are as good as forks. You can literally taste the communal spirit of sharing. Literally, which isn't always a positive thing. Think germs, dirt, and occasional bits of neighbourly affection that sneak into your stew. When it comes to etiquette, your goal here is to avoid being the human equivalent of a carcass slipping off the sidelines. Chewing with your mouth closed? An absurdity. Instead, the medieval decorum calls for open-mouthed chomping to display utter enjoyment. Just imagine how this must look. A cacophony of gnashing teeth, slobbering sounds that could rival a pack of wild dogs, and the occasional flying piece of food aimed directly at your fellow diners. How charming! Now, should you happen to find yourself at a noble's feast, congratulations. Your chances of being elbow deep in a pot of mystery stew have skyrocketed. This is as close as you'll get to a royal banquet with all the traditional humiliation layered in. Nobility tend to serve their meals in grand fashion, so remember, it's all about the visual spectacle. You might find a boar's head as the centrepiece, complete with an apple stuffed in its mouth, like it's the world's saddest Christmas feast. While the nobles may slice into the entree with lavish displays, the peasants, well, let's just say we are scavengers hoping not to starve. To secure a satisfying share of the meal, your approach is crucial. Boldness is next to godliness. It isn't just about what you can hoard onto your plate, it's also about how high you can stack it before gravity, along with your dignity, takes a tumble. Jostle your way through guests, feign an accidental elbow jab here and there, and hope for a few morsels to spill directly into your waiting grasp. Eye contact with someone holding a hunk of bread? It's your golden ticket. Who cares about politeness when that crusty loaf is just waiting to be devoured? If you happen to notice a glimmer of refuse in the stew, consider yourself lucky. Picking it out with your bare hands is practically encouraged, a rite of passage in this culinary battleground. And don't worry too much about the social repercussions. Everyone will be too busy elbow deep in their own bowls to notice the violation of any sanitary standards, the worst kept secret in the kingdom. But the real test of your dining prowess lies in making small talk. You see, conversation isn't just mandatory, it's a minefield. Ask about the weather only if you want to get caught in a discussion about the blight that took down this year's crops. Complaining about the food quality. That's code for fetch the nearest guillotine. It's basically a death wish. Rather than sharing pleasantries, traducing local gossip is more practical. Did you hear about that poor soul who was executed for stealing a loaf of bread? It might just get your dining partners to choke on the very food they're devouring. As the evening wears on, don't forget to expertly balance your mealtime noise levels. While excessive groaning may seem primitive, even intoxicating, it can lead to unwanted stares. Take it down a notch. No one wants to set a precedent for stomach acoustics. So when the food starts to stick to the rafters, or your neighbour rips a massive belch worthy of a bardic ballad, you silently applaud, but keep your composure. Finally, as the last remnants of the communal dish disappear, make your move. There's always leftover food to compete over. But peer into the empty pot, question your life choices, and ponder whether tomorrow you'll still have the guts to repeat this alive and loud experience. There you have it, a meal wrapped in chaos, humour, and just enough etiquette, or lack thereof, to remind you that survival in the Middle Ages isn't just about the food on your plate, it's a comedic survival of the fittest. Festivals are an excuse to indulge, but remember, gastrointestinal calamities wait for no one. Get ready for cuisine that could bring your entire town together in the afterlife. Picture this. The entire village flocks together, the air thick with the scent of roasting meats, and the laughter of folks who could just as easily fall into a food coma following a hearty, albeit questionable, meal. Nothing says communal joy like the experience of shared suffering, right? After all, nothing bonds a community like unified intestinal distress, because misery loves company, and it doesn't get more miserable than a medieval hangover combined with questionable food choices. As the sun sets, and the festival fireworks, likely made of old horse dung, light up the sky, you'll want to make your way toward the banquet table. Your eyes dart across the smorgasbord, where delicacies are presented like a buffet of chaos. From overcooked meats sizzling dangerously close to the point of reanimation, to centuries-old bread with the solidity of a brick. Welcome to medieval culinary extravagance. As you examine the spread, you must navigate through a sea of generous portions that could have easily housed a small family of pigs. Is that food, or a Victorian-era art installation? Who knows? Your first challenge, the pottage. Ah, yes, the trusty staple of medieval life, the gloop that began life as a bit of broth surrounded by whatever scraps were left after the nobles finished belly feasting. Pottage is the surprise ingredient in every festive feast, the base of culinary experimentation since time immemorial. Every layer you dig is a testament to just how long it's been simmering. So long that even the bowl might start to dissolve. Did that flavour come from the peas? Or was it reminiscent of last year's turnips the cook decided to throw in for texture? You'll be pondering this as you dive into your mystery stew and wonder if the thing floating on the surface is an herb or the remains of an unfortunate rodent. Bon appétit. Look, it's roast pig. You'll hear a rousing cheer as someone drags in a whole pig, its skin glistening like it just came from a spa day in a very dirty river. Your village might not have had health codes promising food safety since forever, but who needs that when you've got a rustic sentimentalism for the more, the merrier? Who cares about the smell when you can revel in the thrill of attacking a freshly roasted pig and the camaraderie of attacking it as a pack? Get your best friends and family around that pig and dig in, literally. Just be prepared to dodge a few elbows as you're each determined not to be the last one left gnawing at the last remaining trotters. Next up, the bread. Ah, yes, the fortress of dietary horror. This loaf, a reliable yet unyielding element of every festive meal, feels as though it was baked during the last Great Plague. It's a bread you could build a house with, and judging by its consistent lack of flavour, it might just double as a construction material. Old recipes suggest it might have been made entirely of sawdust, perfect for adding fibre and crunch to your next dental visit. You slice into it, but stay cautious. If you injure yourself while doing so, you'll be more surprised than the indignant rooster left clucking in the yard. And let's not forget the drinks, a vital component in dulling the comedic tragedy of the spread you just plunged into. Think you'll wash your feast down with a refreshing cup of water? Think again. In a world where clean water is as scarce as a noble with a sense of humour, your options are limited to weak ale or an equally questionable wine. Your choice comes down to what gives you the least chance of needing a chamber pot during the festival. At this point, the idea of drinking something you can trust sounds almost revolutionary. As the festivities draw to an end, you'll find yourself wandering home, feeling a little worse for wear. You might start wondering why you willingly consumed that hard brick of bread, or why you thought raw onions sautéed in pig grease was the new culinary adventure your taste buds needed. Hint: they probably weren't particularly impressed. What you realise is that while the evening might have felt like a euphoric celebration of bounty, tomorrow morning's reckoning will undoubtedly involve prayer and promises to abstain from any cooking, until next week's festival, that is. And thus the cycle continues: a celebration, a feast, and a collective gastrointestinal disaster that unites not only your stomach but your entire village, forever recalling tales of bravery, culinary courage, and, quite frankly, bad decisions. Welcome to medieval festivity, where every meal is a risk, every drink a gamble, and community is forged over the sacred bond of mutual digestive disaster. Good luck surviving to do it all over again. Get prepped for a live-action episode of Survivor Medieval Edition. Watch as animals transform, somewhat painfully, into your next meal, while you're left pondering if there's an oath of animal rights you might be violating. Picture this. You're standing on the family farm, the smell of fresh hay mixed with a hint of something more pungent. Yes, that would be the unmistakable scent of livestock panic. As the sun rises on yet another day in 14th century Europe, it's time for the daily ritual. The Big Butcher Day, a celebration of meat that's as exhilarating as it is morbid. With a rabbit in one hand and a squealing pig in the other, you're faced with a culinary crossroad. On one side, you could nab the rabbit quick and easy, but that pig, oh, that glorious squealing hunk of potential breakfast, lunch and dinner. Just remember, pigs are stubborn creatures. They don't have the good grace to simply accept their fate. You might think your struggle of choosing between a salad or a burger at your favourite pub is tough. Try haggling with a hog that thinks you're a threat. Cue moments of pure slapstick as you slip in mud, landing in a regrettable embrace with whatever farm creature happens to be nearby. Once you muster the courage to proceed, and after a few attempts at corralling that porker, it's time for the grand finale, the slaughtering. Sure, the neighbours might think you're just a butcher in training, but deep down, you're an amateur performing an ancient rite of passage. The locals will be judging your technique, so let's pray you don't accidentally start a modern remake of The Exorcist while wielding a very dull blade. As you examine your shiny butcher's knife with a mix of admiration and fear, you're suddenly thrust into a medieval version of Chopped. Every cut, slice and crack of bones seems to echo like a thunderclap through the quiet fields. Your audience, friends, family and a few distressed animals, watch on. If they could place bets, you'd be ensnared in layers of awkwardness that the stakes are just way too high. Once you've summoned every ounce of courage and hacked off the required chunks, here comes the best part. You need to process the bits before the food you'd like to serve. Guess begins a slow descent into a stench, rivaling that of your neighbour's failed batch of turnips. In your medieval workshop, you'd be amazed at how easily something that once had a pulse can be transformed into butchered pieces that vaguely resemble a dinner menu. Score 1 for the butcher. But the fun doesn't stop here. Think of it as a medieval episode of Nailed It. Your next mission is preserving the bounty, a true culinary obstacle course. Hang that meat high, salt it down, or smoke it like your uncle at a family barbecue fighting off bees. Who knew exercise was just watching your meat dangle from the rafters? You'll be sweating drops of panic as you turn it into what the nobles call dry delicacies, while reminding yourself that in the eyes of the peasants, you're a culinary hero, or at least not the worst one. After the flurry of activity, and certainly more than a few selected expletives as you try not to drop a prized piece, because we must find greatness in the mundane, dinner's finally ready for the grand reveal. If all goes well, family members will suck their teeth in approval, and not out of sheer horror. You can just see their faces. Is this meat slow cooked to perfection, or does it taste like the inside of a medieval shoe? Bon appétit, or as they say in these parts, let's hope everything works out for the best. In the quaint palette of medieval life, the butcher's block is where survival meets artistry. So here's to lively debates over spices, suspicious meat flavours, and the occasional loss of dignity. Because what's a little chaos compared to the scent of victory? Or maybe just the scent of the last meal? And don't forget to toast to the ancestors who forged onward with an iron stomach and an adventurous spirit, always reminding us that without a few cringeworthy moments, you might not have been able to savour the flavour of success. So pick up that dagger and make dinner, or just an acceptable approximation of it, while you've still got the dexterity of a medieval warrior. Ready to take on the rest of the journey? Buckle up, because it's now time to see just how creative our medieval friends can get with the culinary oddities that follow. You can't just shove everything in a fridge you don't have. You'll need to get creative figuring out how to store all this unsatisfactory medieval food without inviting half of your garden's insect population to dinner. Unlike modern-day pantries filled with rainbow-coloured post-it notes marking expiration dates, medieval food storage is less about organisation and more about survival. Think of it as an elaborate game of culinary Tetris, where every item is begging for a place, and one miscalculation could lead to a cringe-worthy bioweapon in your kitchen. First, let's talk about the obvious. There are no coolers or airtight containers. Your best bet is a handy-dandy wooden barrel, a trusty clay pot, or if you're very lucky, a robust sack made from whatever animal skin you could barter for. But before you go thinking you just hit the jackpot with a barrel of pickles, remember, this is the Middle Ages, where one man's fermented delight could easily become another's rancid regret. As the seasons change, so do your survival tactics. Winter rolls in, and suddenly that lovely garden you tended is covered in snow, leaving you with only a semblance of potatoes and a few sad carrots to last until spring. You might think, I'll just store 'em in a cooler. But surprise, it's not that simple. You'll need to trick the elements, like nature's very own food magician. Burying your produce in straw or snow can help keep it cool and fresh, or at least relatively unrotten. What a comfort to know that the key to survival is to trust the principles of nature while also praying to whatever deities you can muster for good luck. Now, you could always opt for preserving food through drying. It's great until you realise you've spent the entire afternoon standing over the fire, trying not to inhale the smoke while turning apples into leathery discs. Applesauce? Nope. Crunchy, shriveled circles that might chew right back. And should you decide to go the route of salting, brace yourself. This is hardly a health inspection approved method. You'll be layering your meat in heaps of salt, hoping it won't turn into an impromptu science experiment that could rival anything nasty found in a lab. And what about dairy? Ah yes, the fascinating world of curdling. Milk might be great for a drink on a warm day, until you've got a pot of curdled mystery goo taking up residence in your kitchen. This has become your cheese and, oh, it smells like a goat's dream gone wrong. You could try your hand at making butter, but it's not as simple as just churning. You'll also need to contend with whatever strange bacteria just decided to blow through for a visit. Enjoy. When those noblemen walk by, you're surely not inviting them for a taste test of your wonderfully preserved food. Instead, watch as they dig into lavish feasts you can only dream about while you stumble through your animal skin sack of leftover turnips. And let's not even get started on the risks of food storage. Rats, roaches, and other unsavoury guests might very well consider your humble abode their 5-star hotel. If they could talk, rest assured they'd be leaving a 1-star review or two. As you ponder the daily grind of storage woes, let's also talk about the divine wretchedness known as a food shortage. At the slightest whisper of famine, people try to hoard for winter, only to discover that their local grain merchant just made off with their gold, along with the last of the good bread. Talk about being last on the guest list for dinner. You might just find yourself on a quest for that one neighbour with a secret stash of sauerkraut, hoping that the odour won't chase you away. In due time, perhaps you'll figure out how to master the art of preservation, avoiding the unfortunate events of your past. After all, every nightmare could transform into another lesson. In medieval life, simplicity is not a luxury. It's all about navigating the food game with just the right blend of luck and resilience. So, as you prepare to serve your makeshift meals, remember that while modern life annoyances may seem frustrating, they pale in comparison to the epic saga of food storage in medieval times. Welcome to the true artistry of a time without fridges, where the tricky balance of survival and culinary acceptance is all part of the unfortunate tapestry. As you bravely dance the delicate tango of medieval food storage, just know this: every bite is laced with uncertainties, yet underlined with a persistent hope that you won't succumb to your culinary misfortunes just yet. And if you do, there's always tomorrow's pot of whatever survived the night, bon appétit, or rather, bonne chance. Ever had dinner for one? You will soon. In a world dominated by communal dining, savouring a meal alone is akin to a public declaration of your misfortunes. Hope you enjoy the view of those leftover rats. In the Middle Ages, dining alone is more than just a choice. It's a one-way ticket to the land of solitude, where the biggest companion is the lingering smell of whatever questionable stew or hard bread is on the menu. As you sit by the flickering candlelight, or more accurately, a tallow candle that's probably half tedious and half melted, you can't help but feel the palpable tension of being the lone wolf at the table. Imagine it, the laughter of family and friends surrounding you, all sharing copious amounts of medieval pottage, while you cling to a single hunk of stale bread like it's a life jacket in stormy seas. There's no one around to appreciate your culinary anguish, or to commiserate about the disastrous quality of the food. You nearly choke on a piece of rock-hard rye thinking about how your neighbours will feast on the leftover venison that was definitely not destined for your gut. However, it's the act of eating alone that serves as a reflection of your status. For the lower classes, eating alone signals a failure of both food acquisition and social standing. "Look at that pitying spectacle," whispers old Dame Marjorie across the fire pit, as she hands out the last scraps of vegetables to her gaggle of squabbling children. Poor soul hardly has a pot to pottage. And just like that, your dinner is the entertainment for the evening, devolving into gossip fodder for the village like some grim pantomime. Let's not forget the true challenge of dining alone, the table manners, or lack thereof, during a meal. As you tear at your meagre portion of bread, which feels suspiciously like rivaling the local castle for hardness, you can't help but ponder what lofty tables you might have dined at had fate smiled a little more kindly. But alas, here you are. You make the din of chewing and choking your own intimate concert, with each awkward bite echoing off the walls like a call for help. And may the gods be merciful if you accidentally drop a morsel, because most of the ingredients will be rare treats you could only dream of snagging. Now, if you had the misfortune of being a solitary soul not due to circumstance but due to choice, rumour would likely run wild, transforming your dinner into public theatre. He must be cursed, they'd say, or worse, she's surely not cooking well enough to retain company. You can picture it now, an unwashed batch of mystery stew bubbling away on the back burner while you plant your elbows on the table, staring forlornly into the abyss of your empty plate. That's right. You become the medieval equivalent of a walking cautionary tale, warning others that dining alone is simply dangerous. In the rare instances when gatherings occur, you down your daily ration of undesirable pottage with your teeth clenched, praying no one else notices you scraping the bottom of your bowl with a groan. Imagine discussing daily horrors with your neighbours over their delectable servings of faintly seasoned deer, while you feign joy as you gnaw on a piece of cheese that might have gotten you scorned for being too aged even in its prime. You try to choke down whatever wayward morsel of pottage is left, all while envying their vibrant tales of shared laughter and culinary delights. So, if you ever find yourself alone at the table, under siege by the echo of your own solitary issues, remember it's not just about the food, it's the potion of expectations clashing with reality. Your meal of bread, and perhaps a pat of butter, becomes a test against facing the world, while people at communal tables smirk over servings like Albanian stew and Flemish pie. With regret in every chew and every grain of regret, rest assured that dining alone in the Middle Ages is a test of endurance, pride, and the art of not taking a fateful swipe at your rancid pottage. So as you swallow the remnants of your solitude, comfort yourself with a glass of ale, the one blessing that will bring better days, right after you finish this dinner, of course. Let's dive into the chasm between rich and poor. Nobles feast on delicacies while you're left with whatever basin of pottage your neighbour generously offers. Time to revisit the concept of sharing, right? In the world of medieval cuisine, your proximity to the Lord's table determines not just your social status, but also your culinary fate. While the nobles enjoy extravagant banquets filled with roasted peacocks and spiced wine, all you've got is a bowl of questionable vegetable stew that's possibly been simmering since King Arthur's coronation. Imagine yourself as a peasant with a family of 7. Then picture the looks of sheer envy as the neighbouring gentry throw a lavish feast. The very air is infused with the aroma of spiced meats, freshly baked bread still warm from the oven, and grapes so succulent they could almost sing the strains of delightful ballads. Meanwhile, you sit on the dirt floor of your hovel, working your way through a heaping bowl of pottage, a floppy mix of whatever old vegetables the village could spare, boiled until they're less identifiable than a piece of abstract art. It's less like a meal and more like a textured reminder of your social status. Now, let's consider the perfect dining scene at the manor. Citizens of the noble class recline on benches upholstered in rich fabrics, laughing as goblets filled with wine glisten under the flickering torchlight. They indulge in roasted meats accompanied by fragrant herbs, fruits, and pastries as the catering staff rushes about, ensuring all are content. And when they're finished, they simply toss the leftovers to the hounds or, heaven forbid, the peasants' dogs. Because if you thought sharing was a generous act, think again. Contrast that with your dinner setup. Your family gathers around a large bowl, or what passes for large, holding just enough pottage for most of you to feel dissatisfied. There's no table, just a wooden crate that doubles as a seating option. You take turns dipping your fingers into the slop, fighting for the remnants that you hope contains something that grows from the earth, and praying that no one coughs in there before you get a good spoonful. But it's not just about the food quantity, it's also the quality of what lands in your bowl. While peasants like you find themselves with an endless supply of turnips, weeds, and whatever happened to wander into your pot today, nobles are savouring culinary experiments with sugar and spice, literal treasures locked away in the rich man's pantry like a dragon hoarding gold. To them, a pinch of saffron is like sprinkling fairy dust on a dish, turning it from a meal into a royal experience. Meanwhile, you're left wondering if mystery meat could just be yesterday's leftovers or perhaps the neighbour's increasingly rebellious goat. Let's not even get started on festival days. The noble feasts include intricate displays with dishes worthy of a museum exhibit, highlighted by giant pies shaped like castles and swan legs decorated with ornate feathers. You, however, will become quite familiar with food envy at these festivals. "Oh, look," you'll mutter under your breath, "another strange stew made of root vegetables," while watching your children's eyes gleam at the sight of feasting knights throwing bread rolls like it's the Olympics. You can almost smell the salt of their laughter as your own stomach churns in agony. Then there are the secrets. Oh yes, there are secrets. The nobles are infamous for tossing ingredients in the pot from a magic central pantry, infused with spices from lands beyond your imagination. Rumours swirl that they even have access to fresh fruits and vegetables year-round. How do they manage that? Could it be through some sorcery you'll never have access to? Or simply a servant smuggling in the goods on the sly? Meanwhile, you're left grappling with the realization that your family farm produces only what the weather deems fit to grace your subsistence diet. And as the day draws to a close, reflecting upon your dinner situation, you realize that in this world of feudal hierarchy, every grain of food and every drop of ale divide your existence like a wide, imposing moat. Who knew that in a reality where you're just trying to stay alive, the very food you consume marks you as peasant on a sign proclaiming "Do not enter"? Hope floats around the responsibilities of gathering mush every evening, but deep down, you understand your appetite may never bridge that fundamental gap. So as you settle in for another night of your beloved porridge, this time flavoured with existential dread, remember that in the medieval world, food isn't just sustenance. It's a reflection of your status, community, and occasionally your dreams of biting into something that doesn't taste like a sad vegetable joke. Welcome to the medieval banquet, where class distinctions are served hot, and at the end of the day, everyone's belly knows who's on top and who's still scraping the bottom. Look closely at grains, your unsung heroes. In an unexpected twist of fate, discover how they keep your group alive, or might just cause you to start hallucinating farm animals dancing. Who knew whole grains could be that exciting? In the medieval world, grains were the foundation of diet, culture, and social hierarchy. But let's be real. Nothing brings folks together quite like a hearty bowl of mushy oats or a dense loaf of bread. Imagine walking into a medieval kitchen, the air thick with the scent of freshly ground flour, which often included bits of everything from wheat to, on particularly desperate days, the odd acorn. It's a gritty scene, as the millstones creak like a cast-iron kettle on the verge of boiling over. You'd hear the rhythmic thud of grain being ground, sound effects provided courtesy of a hard-working peasant who has seen better days. Too bad they didn't have Spotify back then. Their playlist would primarily consist of sighs and grumbles. Picture this. You're a farmer, and every spring you plant that precious grain. Wheat, barley, rye, your trifecta of survival. It's no simple feat, mind you. You're bending over, toiling away in muddy fields, praying your plants don't fall victim to blights, pests, or your neighbour's wandering goats, who seem to have taken up sides in their own personal battle for the best patch of crops. But guess what? You reap what you sow. Let's hope no one else reaps first, and when it comes time to harvest, it's like winning the medieval lottery. During harvest, the entire village turns into one boisterous, chaotic victory parade, minus the confetti and good taste. As you gather your grains, you can't help but feel like a heroine in a saga of survival. Those grains are worth their weight in gold, unless you're the unlucky one who grows the more economical but less desirable types, like spelt. If the lords are rectifying their pottage with the likes of fine wheat, you better believe that your whole grain mix is going straight to the livestock. Movie rights to your life story may be in the works, but first, you need to secure your status in the food chain. Now, let's say you get a nice yield. Great news. But guess what comes next? Storage. Cue ominous music. You must stash away your bounty in makeshift granaries filled with more rodents and mould than you'd like to admit. The hidey holes of the medieval world often came with guests that would gnaw away at your reserves, ensuring you'd be forever playing the guess what's crawling in my food today game. Texture becomes adventurous meat for thought. However, grains are flexible. They can be made into a multitude of forms to stave off that pesky hunger. You could bake your grains into humble breads, or was it a weapon of marital strife? Ever tried sharing a loaf that's harder than your father's old boots? Good luck biting down on that. Or try your hand at porridge, which involves boiling your grains until they turn into a gloopy concoction. The result? A breakfast whose consistency is best likened to a thick cement mix. Speaking of breakfast, medieval folk believed starting the day with solid grain goodness would power them through their back-breaking labour. At least until the actual reality of having a starch-heavy stomach kicked in. Enter the post-breakfast mad dash to finish your work before gastrointestinal distress brings your entire day of labour to a halt. Ah, the joys of medieval calories. But wait, there's more. As versatile as these grains were, they also played a role in social stratification. Tied to a lord? Lucky you! You probably dined on fancy pies stuffed with the finest grains available. But if you were one of the peasantry, your choice was more like playing the Hunger Games. Surviving a day on that rock-hard bread might depend on luck, skill, and how far in debt you are to your neighbour, who absolutely needs to take stock of their uninvited pests. Ultimately, those grains represent the very struggle for survival in the medieval age. They're not just a form of sustenance, they are tokens of resilience confronting adverse conditions and unpredictable whims of the local lords. So, next time you sit down to a meal, perhaps offer a humble thanks to these culinary heroes, because without our beloved grains, history as we know it would have turned out very differently. It's quite the legacy, grains winning against all odds, fueling lives, feeding armies, and cementing friendships, assuming nobody throws half a loaf because they were still hungry. Enter the realm of servants, each eager to catch the latest dirt from the hearth. Trust what you hear at your peril, because truths could be intertwined with the occasional rotten egg, both figuratively and literally. In the medieval kitchen, where flour dust swirled like the air of a ghost town, rumours flew as quickly as food was cooked. A friendly warning: if you place too much faith in the whispers of the scullions, you might find yourself biting into a very spicy meat pie that was supposed to be fish. Nothing adds flavour like the genuine fear of food poisoning. Take, for instance, the head cook, a master of chaos who wore her apron like a battle flag and was known for her fiery temper and equally fiery pots. She was a culinary wizard until that one disastrous day when her famous soup, purportedly made with the finest leftovers, accidentally became the village's new celebrity recipe for a survival of the fittest. The scullions were left to ponder whether they were cooking with mystery meat or just a mystery altogether. It was practically an episode of Survivor, the kitchen edition. But let's not forget about the peasants who stood watch over the sizzling pots from the corner of the kitchen. They served as both sous chefs and secret informants, providing tidbits of gossip while earning their meagre fare. Expect nothing less than a verbal jousting match as ingredients were chopped alongside the sharp barbs that flung across the chopping block. Who needed a soap opera when you had two cooks settling their disputes over which one's potato soup was actually edible? And trust me, both would rather toss in a louse than admit that last week's bread was closer in texture to a medieval stone than a loaf. Meal prep was no walk in the park, especially when the locals would waltz in to barter for a morsel of food, a procession punctuated by more whispers and suspicions. Cooks delighted in crafting obscure and vaguely threatening terms for the day's special, insisting it was fresh, a word that, in medieval terms, was subject to interpretation. Fresh could mean last week, or if you were especially lucky, yesterday. And let's not even get started on special. That descriptor was often reserved for items that had seen better days, and had possibly discussed revolution with the local rats just hours prior. As you wandered through the humble abode, you could catch snippets of gossip drifting from the kitchen, a blend of poorly concealed laughter and loud exclamations. Did you hear about young Wilhelmina? She's taken to suddenly swooning in the presence of that new squire, only to be caught last night raiding the pantry for rations because her bonnets were too tight. Such tales would send the kitchen into fits, and while they cooked, the servants baked stories more delicious than bread. However, peace is a fickle mistress in the world of medieval kitchens. You might stumble upon the occasional grumbling about the lord who demanded his steak to be rare enough to still moo. Imagine being the kitchen servant fetches said meal. I'll go out with the ladies and grab a fresh rabbit, you may say, while absolutely praying that the hounds won't set them off on a wild chase that would leave you empty-handed and with quite a reputation to salvage. Forget cleaning dishes. What if you had to serve a sauce made with tears? And let's talk about the secret ingredient struggle, where cooks would wrestle fiercely for the privilege of showcasing their hidden talent in the hopes of impressing the local lord, who often had as much taste as a donkey in a costume. Some concoctions contained ingredients you might imagine throwing out at the first whiff, primarily herbal medicines from the local witch. Yes, those mysterious concoctions were often disguised as exotic flavours. In the kitchen, one miscalculation transformed a pot of stew into the candid culinary rendition of What Was I Thinking? In conclusion, the medieval kitchen isn't just where food is prepared, it's where the pulse of the village beats strongest. With whispers of scandal, daring ingredients, and rivalries hotter than the fires that fueled their stoves, it served as the stage for a comedic opera where the stakes were incredibly high, often matching the stakes of the food's questionable freshness. So next time you savour what's on your modern dinner table, remember the stories that passed through those medieval kitchens. You wouldn't want to end up as the punchline of a gossipy tale better left unspoken. Nature plays a cruel game of hide and seek. Some food is seasonal, and you never know if your next meal will feature fresh delights or proteins that might cause spontaneous glee or panic. Your call. Picture this. You wake up excited at the chance of a hearty dinner, only to discover that the local market offers a delightful selection of wilted cabbage, or, if you're lucky, turnips that could double as ineffective doorstops. Talk about a dinner date gone terribly wrong. Seasonal ingredients were the lifeblood of medieval meals, and every season brought its own set of challenges and opportunities. In spring, you might score some peas or asparagus, which could feel like winning the vegetable lottery. And what an occasion it is when you finally scoop up bright green morsels. Forget those frozen peas. These are so fresh they practically sing psalms of joy. But hurry, blink, and you'll find yourself staring at a withering patch that makes you question your life choices and the concept of sustainability in medieval times. Resisting the urge to negotiate with your neighbour to share their crop is a daily endeavour, right up there with dodging rats and pretending your life choices are coherent. Summer? Ah, summer. That glorious season when berries burst onto the scene. Strawberries, raspberries and blackberries would beckon, teasing the senses with invitations to indulge. They were practically nature's candy, bright and sweet, but durable only for moments before becoming mushy offerings for the local rodents. Seriously, these fruits had a shelf life shorter than your average medieval evening entertainment. No one loved to see someone plop down a basket of muddy, juicy disappointment at the communal table. Great, more pest-infested mush, you'd think, while accepting a half-rotten handful of berries as if they were trophies from a battle well fought. At harvest time in the fall, the bounty burst forth, with fields ripe and ready for the picking. Thanks to dedicated peasants braving the elements, you might enjoy the fleeting seasonal luxury of fresh apples, squash and, gasp, actual grains. Bread, that glorious staple, finally gets a chance to be slightly less terrible. Of course, those last-minute cobweb-covered apples may also come with a risk. Serious discussions about their potential toxicity often happen later in hushed tones over fermented beverages. This apple tasted a bit off quickly becomes a code for I may be visiting the other side sooner than expected. Then there's winter, where your hopes of a delightful table turn into a food scavenger hunt worthy of its own epic saga. Forget fresh produce. You're left with howling winds and the very real possibility of frostbite from looking for last month's potatoes. The only thing you'll find hidden under layers of snow is a suspicious hunk of turnip, which also seems to have outstayed its welcome. You're just fine, the tuber seems to wink back at, you looking less edible and more like a medieval horror movie prop. The idea of fresh ingredients melts away faster than your dignity when trying to cook. It becomes clear that survival is the name of the game, not culinary enjoyment. As the blustery winter progresses, you may receive the occasional visit from Santa, the butcher, who literally throws scraps your way that'd taste better if you were starving in a snowstorm. Here, enjoy this lumpy hunk of something that was probably once alive, he'd shout from across the icy village square, while you smile like you've just found the Holy Grail. Your culinary options dwindle, leaving you chewing on whatever you can scrounge, a delightful gastronomic combination of despair and determination. So, as the seasons shift, you begin to understand that meal preparation in medieval times is less about choosing flavours and more about ensuring you don't starve. Or worse, gnaw on something you later find out belongs to a long-deceased relative. Embrace the nuances of each season, because the next meal could either spoil faster than a rumour at court, or turn into a tense dinner conversation about your choice in vegetables. All said and done, eating in the Middle Ages is a survival game where ignorance truly is bliss. Let's face it, every meal might come with a side of adventure or potentially dangerous surprises. Bon appétit, medieval friends. Horrible food toys, medieval baby bites. Food for babies is less about soothing frazzled nerves and more about toughening them up for whatever life throws at them. Those mushy options you may never want your future child to eat again. In the medieval world, the idea of what constitutes baby food would make a modern parent shudder. Forget the gerber that assures you of vitamins and minerals. What you're looking at is a culinary experiment gone rogue. Imagine sitting down to a feast. Only this time it's anchored by a bowl of gruel that has been lovingly transformed into a texture exactly like brick dust mixed with water. Yes, we're talking about an unholy mixture of whatever grain the family could scrape together, boiled until it's thick and gloppy enough to serve as a wall adhesive. This was your precious baby's nutritional foundation. The idea being that by introducing them to such robust fare, they'd build character, resilience, and perhaps achieve a taste for stone. So, what exactly do babies eat in the Middle Ages? Well, if they're lucky, they might get a taste of some porridge, a glorious combination of oats mixed with a splash of whatever was lying around, the family's remnants of supper, which might contain a suspiciously limp vegetable or two, lovingly deemed nutritious. If it survived the evening's rats, that is. Truly, the fear of starvation was the best spice they had back then, adding an invigorating sense of urgency to mealtime. But wait, that gets even more inventive, or terrifying depending on how you look at it. Some households would offer slices of hard bread, so tough it could double as a medieval training weapon, telling toddlers, "You're not going to die in this world until you can handle this." In essence, chewing through a loaf of bread was less a quest for sustenance and more of a test of patience and determination, not to mention dental health, or lack thereof. Then comes the pièce de résistance of medieval baby bites, the pap, a mushy mixture of grains soaked in water and mashed. Before you envision a delightful, creamy consistency, let me assure you, in practice, it was more akin to oatmeal left out in the sun for a fortnight. Babies would chew, spit, and make the same misunderstood faces parents make when they accidentally bite into a lemon. The goal was to toughen them up for a world that promised disease, filth, and a persistent lack of clean linens. And what else might inadvertently land in the infant's bowl? Fancy a bit of boiled cabbage? Toss it in. After all, you'd be doing the parents a favour by making vegetables seem altogether less desirable. Your tiny human should definitely get on board with those flavours, or at least develop a strong aversion to them early on. Eat your greens, dear. You're a peasant. They're practically a delicacy. Little did they know that cabbage might one day become the main course, or, more tragically, their only course, the real kicker. When your precious little darling shows signs of discontent and begins to spit out their food. Shocking! But of course, what would a medieval parent do in response? They would double down, shoving more food into the tiny mouths, firmly believing that since they survived on this gruel, so should their offspring. Roll with the punches, they'd say, while wiping their hands on dirty tunics that had barely seen a wash since last summer's harvest. Yet, the true horror of medieval baby food extends beyond unfathomable textures and questionable flavours. Spices, those valuable commodities, were a rarity, reserved for the wealthy. Your average peasant had a meagre stockpile of salt and whatever came from that bit of a garden you christened vegetable patch. One could easily picture the agonising reality of a child, fresh out of the cradle, eyeing their older siblings' platter of turnips and rotting mutton, wishing desperately for something that doesn't resemble a rock or the contents of a barn. Remarkably, despite all this, the human race carried on. Those brave little souls choked down their thick concoctions, sometimes literally, emerging stronger, or perhaps just remarkably resilient, whenever a mealtime could leave them in tears or unwanted visits from the village apothecary. And so, medieval babies learned quickly, life isn't always sweet, but if you manage to chew long enough, it could provide sustenance and a somewhat ironically enticing way to complain to your peers about the inconsistency of their own gruel. So as you drift off into slumber tonight, just remember, if you ever find yourself wrestling with leftovers or contemplating a particularly creative recipe, at least you'll never have to face the nightmarish world of medieval baby bits, where flavour was non-existent, texture defied physics, and every mealtime was an uncharted culinary adventure. Sleep tight. Forget the gold. Spices are the true currency of emperors. Ever tried paying with peppercorns? Good luck with that. Discover how these culinary jewels transform common dinners into royal feasts if you're lucky enough to afford them. In medieval cuisine, without refrigeration, spices pulled double duty as preservatives that might keep your meat from turning into a science experiment before dinner was served. But here's the twist. A single pinch of spice could command more than an entire year's wages for a peasant. Imagine gathering your ingredients for the evening stew, a wilted cabbage, a potato that's been sitting around so long it's practically a family member, and whatever grim piece of meat you could barter for at the market. Hopefully not rat this time. Now, picture your neighbour splurging on a few rare grains of saffron, each one a tiny golden strand longer than the last, excuses your spouse made when they forgot to pick up the milk. You look at your carrots, sigh dramatically and think, if only I could toss in a hint of cinnamon, or maybe just a dab of nutmeg. Perhaps a divine transformation awaits. So, why the obsession with spices? Because medieval minds were onto something ingenious. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves weren't just flavour enhancers. They promised a medley of magical properties. Getting sick. A sprinkle of ginger was said to revitalise you. Feeling particularly dull. Cloves might just lift your spirits and your meals out of the gravest grooves of mediocrity. You'd think these little flavour balls rolled in from heaven, given how much people paid for them. Now let's talk about the spice trade. A wild journey across oceans and deserts where a daring merchant might pay the price of a ship just to bring back a mere handful of these fragrant treasures. Picture it. A grizzled sailor lugging sacks filled with exotic spices, sweating like a sinner in church, just waiting for some grateful noble to sparingly sprinkle them over their peasant-made delicacies. This was a game of culinary twister. How can one sprinkle the spice of life when the life in question is dragging on like a bad opera? Enter the famous Silk Route, the ancient highway of trade connecting east and west. Imagine bustling bazaars filled with merchants yelling all sorts of four-syllable words, because why wouldn't you go for the thesaurus when trying to sell cinnamon? These spices travelled not just from far-off lands, but also with tales of far-off lands, each one carrying the scent of stories and possibly the existential dread of the people, yearning for something more than sheep's wool and root vegetables. But we must address the hidden danger of spices. While your lordly neighbour bathes in saffron-happy thoughts, you're left undisturbed, trying not to think about the mould that has begun to reclaim your kitchen. You consider saving up to acquire some black pepper, not because you want to enhance your bland stew, but because it has an air of sophistication, because nothing says I made it quite like shaking a dusty old jar of pepper at your envious friends. Oh, this? I only have a few scattered grains left. Must save them for a special occasion. For the noble houses, meals became events, showcasing their wealth through lavish spreads featuring spices that could double as currency, or sometimes even the main meal. Imagine gathering with lords and ladies, every dish draped lavishly in candied fruits and decadent sauces. They sat back luxuriating in their medieval glories while occasionally whispering about that poor farmer down the road who put too much time in last week's soup. Rituals revolved around culinary bravado rather than compassion. So just as you daydream about what you would do with even a fraction of those spices, such romance remained a far-off fantasy. And as the heat of the fire starts to mingle with the aroma of your simmering pottage, you're left wondering if you can convince your neighbour to swap a bit of that exotic cinnamon for a few fresh carrots, and the promise of friendship. Potentially a negotiating point for next week's market. In the grand mix of it all, spices offered medieval people hope and dreams, but they were also a reminder of the Great Divide. They brought status to social gatherings, livened up dull conversations, and turned common meals into theatrical performances. So, whether it was a lavish feast or a meagre pottage, the true hero of the medieval kitchen remained clear. It was the spices, gritty, pungent, and occasionally, ironically out of place. Because in the medieval world you could always count on the final verdict. Nothing witnesses a poorly cooked meal better than an absent spice rack. As the day draws to a close, consider this. You've eaten, endured, and still wonder if that stew could lead to a graveyard plot. Reflect on your trials and whether tomorrow's breakfast of mystery food will finally leave your stomach in peace. But before you surrender to sleep, let's take a moment to savour or shudder at the evening's last rites of cooking, eating, and, should fate allow it, surviving. As night settles over your hovel, wait, that's too kind of a term. Let's call it your glorified wooden birdhouse where you've become well acquainted with the rats who made it their home too. The lingering aroma from that evening pottage clings to every surface, a heady blend of mush, questionable meat, and just enough herbs to convince you it might be good for you. You pray it doesn't require a warning label. Before you can let yourself get too cozy, the familiar gurgling begins, the signature tune of indigestion far too common in a medieval diet. Is it the common cold or food poisoning? Either way, you're in for a thrilling night. With a half-eaten loaf of wheaty, rock-hard bread in one hand, and a cup of what you sincerely hope is ale, and not just slightly soured water in the other, you sit down cross-legged on your hay-stuffed mattress that smells like it was last cleaned during the last plague. Your family gathers around you, eyes glinting with intrigue as they await the gripping tale of your day, which consisted mostly of dodging droppings, those delightful surprises the farm animals leave behind as they frolic around. Honestly, call it a daily chore or a full-contact sport. It'll leave you sweaty and wondering how people survived without rubber boots. Tell us, how did you condition your stomach to tolerate that stew? Your elderly cousin asks, her glassy eyes focused on your very being, awaiting the secret ingredient gone awry. You seriously begin to wonder when they'll give award nominations for adventurous cooking like yours. Although tonight's highlight might not be the culinary triumph you'd hoped for, at least everyone remains alive. So far. Following the culinary chatter, you somehow find yourself engaged in discussions about food preservation, or rather, the lack of it. Did you know they used to say garlic could keep the scurvy away? Another family member pipes up, as if sharing this information will somehow explain why last week's leftovers were now deemed a good source of vintage flavour. You contemplate whether your rendition of yesterday's kitchen disaster will feature on a medieval cooking show. Chopped Medieval Edition. Let's just say the competition would likely boil down to how long you can last amongst the odours without passing out. With darkness creeping swiftly outside, the conversation shifts to your nightly ritual, dealing with the aftermath of dinner. You might be exhausted, your belly feeling like a mini battleground, but you know you have to clean up. Outcome: mixing bruised vegetables with whatever little fur remaining is clinging to the pot as you scrape up yesterday's hopes of a successful dinner soiree. Meanwhile, a veritable symphony of stomach noises fills the air, transforming the kitchen into an echo chamber of potential regrets. After attempting to end the long-held tradition of tossing up last night's stew remnants, you turn your attention to the far corners of the room, the sacred food storage area. There lies your trove of leftover meats, which are hanging by pure will and perhaps a thread of noble ambition. How do they even hang there? How long has that been a thing? Initially, you wonder how your ancestors ever survived, But then your thoughts meander to whether you'll ever have the privilege of indulging in fresh ingredients again. You feel the tension rising throughout the room, your family's anxious faces growing more apoplectic as the minutes roll by, structurally preparing for the vote on whether to attempt breakfast at all the next morning. The concern over whether anything would turn from delightful porridge to an edible nightmare feels palpable. Will anyone risk it? Will you throw caution to the wind, wake from your tomb-like sleep, toss out your no longer grainy bread, and wive something with actual flavour? As your family bickers over the potential hazards of consuming last week's breakfast scraps, a laugh bubbles up. Perhaps life as a medieval peasant seems bleak at times, but your little house filled with questionable pottage and even more questionable relatives chases away the dark thoughts of what might have been and leaves you close to the warmth of togetherness, even if that togetherness smells like dimly lit failure. You reach for another drink, taking a swig, and together you brace yourselves for a night spent hoping tomorrow won't end in disaster. Prep your stomachs. It's a grim culinary comedy unfit for royalty. Here's to hoping tomorrow's breakfast will at least be marginally better than today's escapade, so you can pause for thought and wait out the potential peril that is medieval dining. Sleep tight, dear listener,